If you're listening to this after midnight, don't pause the video, don't look behind you, and whatever you do, don't replay the sound you think you just heard. The first time it happened, I thought the noise came from outside my bedroom door. A soft chime, like a doorbell pressed gently, echoed through the hallway. I lived alone, and my house didn't have any indoor bells installed anywhere. Still, I convinced myself it was imagination mixed with late-night anxiety. Then it rang again, clearer, closer, and impossibly deliberate in timing. My phone showed 2:19 a.m., a time I would never forget afterward. I held my breath, listening for footsteps, whispers, anything human at all. Nothing moved except the ceiling fan ticking in slow, uneven rotations. When the chime sounded a third time, my stomach tightened with dread. It no longer seemed distant, it felt like it came from inside my room. I slowly turned toward the bedroom door, expecting to see light underneath. Instead, darkness filled the gap, thick and absolute like spilled ink. My heart thudded loudly enough that I feared it might answer the sound. I whispered hello, immediately regretting how small and fragile I sounded. No reply came, but the air felt heavier, charged with silent attention. Gathering courage, I stepped off the bed and walked toward the handle. The floorboards creaked beneath my feet like warnings I refused to hear. Before touching the knob, the chime rang again, directly behind me now. I spun around so fast my vision blurred and my balance nearly failed. The sound hadn't come from the door, it came from my bedside table. My old alarm clock sat there, dark, unplugged, and completely lifeless. Yet I was certain the chime echoed from that exact silent object. With trembling hands, I reached toward it, expecting vibration or hidden speakers. The surface felt cold, normal, and entirely incapable of making any sound. Then I noticed something that made my throat tighten painfully with fear. The clock display, previously blank, now showed glowing numbers, 2:19 a.m. I hadn't plugged it in for months since the battery compartment broke. A faint humming began, low, mechanical, and disturbingly rhythmic in tone. The chime rang again, this time directly from inside the clock casing. I dropped it instantly, and the sound stopped the moment it hit. Silence returned, thick enough to press painfully against my ears again. I didn't sleep afterward, I sat watching the clock until sunrise arrived. Morning light made everything look harmless, but the unease never actually left me. I kept replaying the sound in my head, wondering how an unplugged clock could behave like that without power, wires, batteries, or explanation. Morning should have erased the fear, but instead, it sharpened it into something colder and more logical. Sunlight poured into my room, revealing the clock on the floor where I had dropped it. It looked harmless again, dusty, silent, and broken. I told myself I had imagined the glow, the chime, the humming. Sleep deprivation can twist reality in strange ways. Still, I didn't touch the clock. I left it there while I made coffee, trying to force my mind into normal thoughts. The kitchen felt unfamiliar, like I had stepped into someone else's house overnight. Every sound seemed louder than usual. The refrigerator hum sounded like distant whispering. The kettle hissed like breath against my ear. By afternoon, I convinced myself to pick up the clock. I carried it to the kitchen table, examining it carefully. The display was blank. No wires. No batteries. Nothing that could explain what happened. I even shook it gently, listening for loose parts inside. It sounded hollow. Then I noticed something strange. Tiny scratch marks circled the back panel, like someone had repeatedly tried to pry it open with a sharp object. I knew those marks weren't there before. I had owned this clock for years, and it had always been smooth. My hands started to feel clammy as I traced the scratches with my finger. That's when my phone buzzed. A notification appeared from my home security app, motion detected in the hallway at 2:19 a.m. I froze. I didn't own any indoor motion sensors. I opened the app with shaking fingers. The timestamp was real. There was a short video clip attached. My breath felt trapped in my chest as I pressed play. The footage showed my hallway in darkness. The camera angle came from the small device near my front door, facing inward. For several seconds, nothing happened. Then, faintly, my bedroom door opened by itself. I watched myself step into the hallway, confused and slow, like I was sleepwalking. But I had no memory of leaving my room. In the video, I stood there for almost a full minute, staring directly at the camera without moving. My eyes looked empty, unfocused, like I wasn't fully awake. Then I turned my head slightly toward the bedroom, as if listening to something behind me. After that, I walked back inside and gently closed the door. The video ended. I checked the time again. 2:19 a.m. I felt a deep, crawling dread spread across my skin. I had been awake at that time, terrified in bed, hearing the chime. But the cameras showed me standing in the hallway during those exact minutes. I replayed the hallway footage so many times that the seconds began to blur together. Each time, the same details stood out. The way I stood perfectly still. The unnatural tilt of my head. The slow, mechanical turn back toward my bedroom. It didn't look like someone who had just woken up. It looked like someone being directed. I checked the timestamp again. 2:19 a.m. Exactly when the chime rang. My hands shook as I walked back to the bedroom. The clock still sat on the kitchen table, harmless and silent. I stared at it as if it might suddenly move. Every part of me wanted to throw it away, but another part needed to understand what was happening. That night, I decided to stay awake. I set up my phone to record video from the dresser, facing the bed and the clock placed beside it. I turned on every light in the room. Midnight came and went quietly. My eyes burned from exhaustion, but I forced myself to stay alert. The house creaked occasionally as it always did, but nothing unusual happened. Then, at exactly 2:18 a.m., the lights flickered once. I held my breath. The room fell silent in a way I had never experienced before, like sound itself had been muted. I glanced at the clock. The display was still dark. My phone screen showed it was still recording. At 2:19 a.m., the chime rang again. But this time, I saw it happen. The clock's display lit up by itself, glowing with the numbers 2:19. The sound didn't come from speakers. It came from inside the casing, vibrating the air around it. My chest felt tight, my body frozen in place. And then something worse happened. In the phone's screen reflection, I saw myself sitting on the bed, staring at the clock. But I wasn't sitting. I was standing near the dresser, holding the phone. I slowly turned my head toward the bed. It was empty. My heart pounded so loudly I could barely hear the chime continuing. I looked back at the phone screen. The image still showed me sitting there, smiling. A slow, unnatural smile that I knew I wasn't making. I dropped the phone. The screen cracked as it hit the floor, and the chime stopped instantly. When I picked it up, the recording had ended by itself. The last frame showed the empty bed again. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't even sit down. I didn't wait for morning this time. As soon as the sky began to lighten, I grabbed the clock, my phone, and my keys, and left the house without looking back. The air outside felt strangely normal, birds chirping, distant traffic humming, as if nothing impossible had happened during the night. That contrast made everything feel worse. I drove straight to an electronics repair shop that opened early. The technician behind the counter looked half asleep as I placed the clock in front of him. I asked him to open it, check it, tell me how it could light up and produce sound without any power source. He unscrewed the back panel while I watched every movement carefully. There was nothing inside. No circuit board. No wires. No battery slot. Just an empty plastic shell. He frowned and said, "This isn't a clock. It's just a casing." My mouth went dry. I told him I had owned it for years. I described the glowing display, the chime, the humming vibration. He gave me a polite, uncomfortable look people reserve for stories they don't want to believe. I paid him and left with the hollow shell in my hands. Back in my car, I checked my phone to show him the recording from last night. The video file was gone. Not corrupted. Not damaged. Completely erased. Even the hallway clip from the previous day had vanished from the security app history. Every trace of evidence had disappeared. That evening, I didn't return home. I booked a cheap motel room across town, convincing myself distance would break whatever strange pattern had started. I placed the clock casing on the table and sat on the edge of the bed, staring at it for hours. Nothing happened. At 2:18 a.m., the motel lights flickered. My heart dropped. I looked at the clock. It was still empty, lifeless plastic. My phone showed the time, 2:19 a.m. Then the chime rang. Not from the clock. From the motel room door. A soft, deliberate doorbell sound echoed through the room. I stared at the door, unable to breathe. No one knocked. No footsteps passed outside. The sound came again, closer this time, like it was inside the walls. I realized something terrifying in that moment. The clock had never been the source. It had only been the first place I noticed it. The chime rang again, and this time, it came from directly behind me. Type continue if you want another midnight case.